The name you gave your dog was not random. Research on pet naming finds it tracks your attachment style, your social identity, and how much you see your dog as a person rather than an animal. The science is more revealing than most owners want to admit. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what your dog's name says about you and what to do with that knowledge. If you want to understand what your dog is really telling you, you are in the right place. Think about the last time you named something that was not a pet. A car maybe, a plant. You probably picked a word that described it. Something functional, maybe a little affectionate. Then think about how you named your dog. For most people, that process felt completely different. It was deliberate, emotional. Sometimes it took weeks. People agonize over dog names in ways they do not agonize over baby names because the stakes feel strangely personal. Studies on pet naming patterns consistently find that dog names have shifted dramatically over the past 3 decades. In the 1980s, the most common dog names were things like King, Rover, Lady, and Duke, names that acknowledge the animal as a different kind of being. Today, the top names are Bella, Max, Charlie, Luna, and Oliver, names that sit on the top baby name lists of the same decade. Something changed in how we conceptualize the dog's place in our lives. They moved from the yard to the bedroom, from working animal to family member. And the names moved with them. That shift is not just cultural sentiment, it reflects a measurable psychological change in what dog ownership means to people who choose it. Here is the question that animal behavior researchers have been quietly circling for years. When you give your dog a human name, what are you actually doing? On the surface, it looks like affection, and it is affection. But it is also something more specific. It is anthropomorphism, the attribution of human traits, emotions, and intentions to a non-human entity. And James Serpell, a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania who has studied human-animal relationships for decades, argues that anthropomorphism is not a mistake or a cognitive error. It is a motivated choice. We do it because it serves a psychological function. When you name your dog Eleanor or Theodore, you are not confused about whether Eleanor is a person. You know she is a dog, but you are signaling something, to yourself and to others, about the nature of the relationship you intend to have with her. You are declaring that this animal will receive the kind of emotional investment you would give a person. That declaration says almost nothing about the dog. It says a great deal about you, your attachment needs, your social identity, and the role you are asking the animal to fill in your emotional life. None of that makes you a bad owner. Number 1. There is a spectrum of anthropomorphism, and your dog's name tells researchers roughly where on it you fall. Psychologists Nicholas Epley, Adam Waits, and John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago published a landmark framework in 2007 in Psychological Review, laying out a 3-factor theory of anthropomorphism. Their central finding was this: we are most likely to anthropomorphize when we feel a need for social connection, when we have limited knowledge about the entity in question, and when the entity is capable of unpredictable behavior. Dogs score high on all 3, but here is the detail that should make you pause. Epley and his team found that loneliness is one of the primary predictors of anthropomorphism. People who report higher social isolation are measurably more likely to assign human names, human emotions, and human intentions to their pets, their cars, and even their computers. This is not a pathology, it is an adaptive response. The brain recruits available social resources when the human social network falls short. Your dog's human name may be an expression of deep affection. It is also, possibly, a quiet signal about the social weight you are asking your dog to carry. The two are not mutually exclusive, but knowing which is dominant in your own case is worth sitting with. Number 2. The name is only the beginning. Watch what happens when an owner actually uses it. For most people with human-named dogs, the name gets delivered in a specific register. Higher pitch, drawn-out vowels, exaggerated intonation. Oh, Theo, are you hungry? Is Theo hungry? This is infant-directed speech, also called motherese or baby talk, the same vocal pattern adults use instinctively with babies. Researchers at the University of York published a study showing that dogs actually prefer this register. They respond more readily, hold eye contact longer, and orient toward the voice with greater engagement when it uses infant-directed patterns, compared to flat adult speech. But here's what the research also reveals. The owner uses it regardless of whether the dog is responding. The register is not primarily a communication strategy. It is an expression of the relational frame the owner has placed the dog inside. When you call your dog Theodore in a high, soft voice, You are activating the same neural and hormonal systems you would activate with a baby. Oxytocin rises, protective instincts engage. The dog becomes, neurobiologically, a dependent you are caring for. The name is the door. The baby talk is you walking through it. If that just made you see your relationship with your pet in a completely different way, hit subscribe. We explore the science of the human-pet bond every week and what it reveals about us. All right, let us keep going. Number 3. In 2011, researchers Zilcha Mano, Mikulencer, and Shaver published a study in the Journal of Research in Personality examining how adult attachment styles map onto pet relationships. What they found was that the same dimensions that characterize human attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and secure attachment, appear in human-pet relationships with measurable consistency. Anxiously attached owners reported higher anthropomorphism scores. They were more likely to describe their dogs as emotionally complex, more likely to project human motivations onto ambiguous dog behaviors, and, critically, more likely to choose names that reinforce the perception of the dog as a quasi-human companion. Avoidantly attached owners showed the reverse. They tended toward functional or breed-typical names and were less likely to use infant-directed speech. Securely attached owners sat in the middle, deeply affectionate, but with a more realistic model of the dog as a dog. The name is a diagnostic. If you chose a name off the baby name list and use it in a voice you would use with a toddler, that is not judgment. That is information. It tells you something about what your nervous system is asking for from this relationship, and whether your dog can realistically provide it. Number 4. Dog names are also identity statements. When you choose the name Winston or Harriet or Clementine, you are not just naming an animal. You are aligning yourself with a certain aesthetic, a set of cultural values, a self-image. Research in social psychology on naming more broadly shows that names function as public identity signals. They communicate how the namer sees themselves as much as how they see the named. Dog names work the same way. In urban and coastal areas, dog names increasingly mirror the naming conventions of creative class communities, names that read as literary, vintage, or irreverent. In rural areas, dog names trend more functional or nature-based. Neither set is more or less affectionate, but they are each broadcasting something about the owner's social identity and how they want to be perceived within their community. James Serpell's work on anthropomorphic selection argues that owners unconsciously select for traits and appearances that match their projected self-image, and naming is the first act in that selection. You named your dog what you named them, partly because of who you believe you are and who you want others to know you to be. That is not vanity. That is human social cognition doing exactly what it was built to do. Number 5. There is a particular naming moment that reveals something especially striking about owner psychology, and it happens most often with rescue dogs. A rescue arrives with a name, given by the shelter, maybe passed down from a previous owner, and a significant portion of new owners change it, sometimes immediately, sometimes after a few weeks of deliberate renaming. On the surface, this looks practical. The dog is new to you. You want to start fresh. But researchers who have examined the rescue name reset find something more psychologically layered going on. Renaming a rescue is often an act of symbolic adoption, a way of saying this animal is now mine, and their story begins here, with me. It is the naming as ownership claim, as attachment ritual. What is revealing is how much energy owners invest in finding the right new name. They interview the dog, they try out sounds, they wait for a name that fits. This waiting is not about the dog's preferences. Dogs adapt to almost any consistent sound within days. The waiting is about the owner's need to find a name that feels true to the relationship they are building. That is not irrational. That is the attachment system doing its careful, deliberate work of forming a bond. Number 6. There is an edge of the anthropomorphism spectrum that is worth naming honestly. For most owners, giving a dog a human name is a healthy expression of affection and attachment. But Serpell's framework and the broader literature on anthropomorphic projection identifies a threshold where anthropomorphism begins to work against the dog's well-being rather than for it. When an owner's projection of human psychology onto a dog becomes so complete that the dog's actual needs, its need for clear communication, for appropriate exercise, for the security of consistent structure, get overridden by what the owner believes the dog must be feeling as a person, both suffer. The name is often the first indicator. Owners who describe their dog's behavior primarily in terms of human emotional complexity. He is doing it to spite me. She is sulking because I was gone too long. Tend to also be the owners who miss the simpler, more accurate behavioral signals the dog is actually sending. Alexandra Horowitz at Barnard College has written extensively about how anthropomorphism, when it replaces genuine observation, leaves owners less attuned to their dogs, not more. You did not teach your dog to be complex, but your need for complexity may be the lens you are seeing them through. The name you chose may be the first sentence of a story you wrote for them, a story that may or may not match who they actually are.
So what do you do with all of this? The first thing worth doing is simply noticing.
Pull up the name you chose. Sit with why you chose it. Was it from a book you love? A person you admired? A sound you wanted to say out loud with affection? None of those answers are wrong, but they are informative. They tell you something about the relational template you arrived at this relationship with. The second thing worth doing is separating two questions that often get conflated. How much do you love your dog? And how accurately do you see them? These are not the same question. You can love enormously and still project. You can be deeply bonded and still miss what is actually happening in front of you. The research is consistent on this. Owners who hold the most accurate model of their dog's cognition, who understand what dogs can and cannot feel in the way humans feel it, tend to have richer, more responsive relationships, not colder ones, more attuned ones. Knowing your dog is not a person does not reduce what you feel for them. It actually frees you to meet the animal that is actually there, the one who has been waiting, patiently and without judgment, for you to see them clearly. Your dog is not judging you for the projection. They are simply, always, waiting to be met. You chose a name. Maybe you agonized over it. Maybe it came instantly. Maybe you changed it after a week. That name is a small autobiography, a condensed version of what you were hoping this relationship would be. And here's what the science keeps returning to, across attachment research, cognitive psychology, and anthrozoology. The owners who get the most from their dogs are not the ones who love them least. They are the ones who hold two things at once, the full weight of what they feel and the honest curiosity about who their dog actually is. The name brought you into relationship with an animal. Now the work is learning to see that animal, not the one in the story you wrote the day you named them, the one in front of you right now, watching you, reading you, carrying more of your emotional world than you may have ever intended to give them. That is not a burden to your dog. It is a starting point. The name was the beginning. Seeing them clearly is the whole point. Thank you for investing your time with us today. Now that you know your dog's name reveals your attachment needs, your social identity, and how much of yourself you are projecting onto them, we are curious. What name did you choose for your dog? And what do you think it says about you? Let us know in the comments. New episodes drop every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so make sure you are subscribed to catch the next one. Until then, decode your dog, decode yourself.